speaks in Japanese if she reads it.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get the schools committee meeting going. Apologies for the tardiness.
Wizard is never late.
And to figure out the rest.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start with introductions, starting with this side. Fred.
Dice.
Ronald.
Forrest Dunbar.
Makes-out.
Christopher Costa.
Susanna Rivera.
Felix Rivera.
Cameron Perez.
Austin Davidson. I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
Peterson.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Crystal Kennedy.
Deanna's.
Okay. So, first, wanted to start with our goals and sort of what's been going on with our goals. Suzanne and I and the rest of Assembly Department Management have been really focusing our time on budget and then thinking strategically about other deadlines that we have coming up. So, Ms. Jones, do we have that memo?
The memo on from D?
No, the budget.
Oh, they're right there for you, Mr. Chair. There's two of them. Oh, the budget. No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. I thought you meant these memos.
Okay. Yeah, we could get that.
Give me a minute to get copies of those.
Sure. So I'll start then with our other priorities. So we were talking about two things as it pertains to our goals, sort of the budget priorities and the legislative priorities. And on the legislative priorities, I think what would make most sense for the timeline is for each of our committees to start exploring legislative priorities within your committee structures in September, and then working through those through October, bringing those back to the full body in October, and then the full body deliberating those in October and November. And if I'm correct, usually we have a legislative program done in December, so or January, or sometimes later, depends on the year. So I think this would be a good timeline for us to follow. Is that something that you think the committees would be able to do in their timelines? Yeah.
So would we would just, in a session like this, come back and say, this is what we're thinking and working on in our committee over the course of how long?
So it would be, I'm talking specifically state legislative priorities.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I know, in some specific committees, I know it has been discussed, and I'd have to go back through the records and everything about, we should add this to the legislative program next time. So I want to give the opportunity for the committees to have that discussion. Yeah, that's key.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so the committees would come to with ideas that we would go to the legislature with and say, listen, we think we would like to see a code change here because it would help us with this. And then so if the other committees make up a list of things, then we can bring that to the legislative committee and come up with a list that we can then take to the legislature.
Yeah, it's sort of all part of the process to help us come up with our legislative program, which is something that we do in tandem with the administration.
Yeah, in the old days, it was almost all capital projects that we were requesting,
Yeah.
and we realized that for the most part is probably not going to happen, and so we can still make some progress in some other areas if we come up with a list of code changes, we might help us.
Yeah, agreed. And I think these last few ones, besides the port, we had a couple of statute changes that we asked the legislature to make. So I think it makes sense for us to consider those. Did you want to say something, Chris?
Well, I think that the last one was simply forwarded as a request to have 2 town hall meetings in Anchorage. And so I want to hope that we all don't do that again, and that instead we pull together a thoughtful approach, which is what this is doing, that we contemplate and move forward a package that is of high value to our constituencies.
You're talking about the budget town halls?
No.
Or which?
Yeah, it was kind of around the budget, the vetoes. That's what the administration forwarded as their program for this year. Was literally we're not going to ask for anything. We're going to ask you to do town halls, and that was, we all this is our opportunity to come up with something integral to our operation.
So, so if you guys can start thinking about adding those discussions in September and then in October, and then they'll come back to us at the end of October, probably in the same form.
We're waiting, I'm sorry, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
that's fine. We can come back to that then. So we'll move on then to, I promised you guys at our last meeting that I would have a more final draft, if we could just take one of each, of the proposed Assembly P&P on communication with administrative staff. I really want to thank Dean Gates and Barbara Jones and Suzanne for really helping out with this one. So there are two things that you're getting. First is the mayor's directive. And it's actually a pretty old directive, but it's, I believe, still the current one that's being used. And then the proposed Assembly P&P. So basically, I think what's the most important parts of this to read is the scope and the policy. And I think particularly the scope and that last sentence in the scope gets to a lot of the concerns that I know some assembly members had about moving in this direction. So we could spend the rest of the time discussing this P&P. What I'd like to do is just get initial thoughts from the members and then schedule a separate rules committee to continue reviewing this P&P. Ms. Jones or Mr. Gates, did you guys want to just walk through this really quick and what this does? Probably Mr. Gates.
Sure, Mr. Shaw.
Thanks.
So, not the latest directive, right?
No, ours, yeah, the draft.
Okay. So, well, the purpose of it is obvious. Just we're a separate branch of government from the executive that communicates with our staff and all the resources they have. So that's the purpose. Just says how should elected officials and assembly members do that. And the scope is trying to define what kind of communications we need to be talk to the principal executives, the CFO, the manager, the attorney, and those are a defined term with the principal executives at the end for offshore email, as opposed to the department heads and its subordinate staff. And this scope is really important because it also says the types of communications this applies to those where the requests require staff time to research and find information or produce an analysis, and they involve matters of public policy, judgment, and direction. And so those are more than, I guess, the type of subjects that the administration leaders need to know about. And it doesn't include the second sentence, not apply to general concepts in far as establish regular position duties of role, or questions to take no or minimal time or effort for staff to respond that are within their area of expertise and it's public information. So as an example, if you ask the property appraisal division, John Gajanis, about some properties and what are the values, assessed values, and how it's changed over the years, that's something you can pull up right away. That's within the expertise and duties. You don't need to go to the CFO for that kind of thing. But if you're asking him, how should we change our appraised value system? I think that's a policy direction. You want to involve the CFO. So the scope is trying to say what type of communications or should we involve the big party head or CFO, and we don't need to involve them. And so that might be sort of gray, but it's a guideline and scope. Yes,
yeah, go ahead.
I just think that strikes right up to the root of the challenge that I have with this whole framing, is that I foresee a time when I don't have such good affiliation with the executive, and that maybe there are 6 of us that have to do work to cabin in the efforts of the executive and the whole administration to ensure that it's doing what the policies of the assembly wants. And so if I'm having a conversation only through the municipal manager or the CFO, who are politically aligned with an administration I don't see eye to eye with, I don't believe that I can't ask the people who are subordinate, hey, if you had a better way to do this, how would you do this? And be able to speak in confidence with them as I develop my proposal for policy going forward. And I think that doesn't matter who the administration is or who the assembly members are, we should have the flexibility to have the conversation so we can ensure that our efforts are reasonable and rational before we enter into the fray at the executive level, where they're told, now you can't talk to us.
You know, it's a good comment. I think, though, respecting branches of government as well as policies here, if we have some philosophical and political differences with the department head or principal executives, if you're talking about policy changes and things like that, which are involved. But I should mention with this administration, at least, you know, this would be a policy procedure for all future reasons. Administrations until it's changed. At least this administration, I recall the mayor saying more than once that his administration is an open group. If anybody's denying information, and talk to the mayor or give directly to you. That's sort of what I understand his position is. But I'm going to go to the mayor, to correct me if I'm wrong, and paraphrasing what he said in the past. So I would say for what you're saying, the remedy is go to Mr. Berkowitz. Tell him we're having issues, communicating.
But what if I have a fundamental disagreement with Mr. Berkowitz, and then he is ordering his staff not to engage with me, and his staff are ordering their subordinates that, no, you shouldn't give him what he's asking. Well, isn't it sometimes better to ask and figure out your case before you raise it to the top? That's how I would look at it.
Well, do you know, thank you. You're asking me what's better?
No, I'm asking you, isn't that a power that we have? And are we giving that away by submitting to this policy?
I would say, if we're asking about what your powers are, we have these in-house and give this communication with administration staff at the direction of the mayor or principal executives. You still have your power, the right to subpoena staff, executive departments head. The clerk has a subpoena if you really need to.
That's a pretty heavy
part. You're talking about, I think this politics. It's politics, it's not legal, but you have the legal powers to police someone. Bring it into account, or you can ask them the questions you want to answer the information you're asking. And the subpoenas are enforceable in our code. It's an enforceable by the superior who is not compliant with. So if it's really that bad, I love it in terms of getting the information. You do have that power to compile information. It's just a long process. I mean, that's the best answer off the cuff right now.
Austin?
Yeah, thanks, Felix. I tend to agree with Chris and see some concerns with this. Particularly, I'm thinking about, we've been reassured that even though we only have one dean, we have many lawyers in the municipal attorney's office. But this sort of says to me that we don't really. We have to go through Becky, and what if Becky weren't her lovely self and didn't want to work with us? So I just feel confused about. I guess maybe I missed it, but can you guys explain why this is happening and what's going on with it and the intent and
Yeah, sure. So this was something that was formulated. We began thinking about it some months ago, and the instigation was concerns from the administration about assembly members not following proper process. And I, being the type of person that likes to follow proper process, asked them, well, what should the proper process be? What's going on? And so came up with this as something in hopes to make sure we can follow some type of process, but leave us enough flexibility. And prior versions of this had a lot more detail to them, and because I wanted much more flexibility to it, we deleted a lot of specific detail. So if there are things that we can do to ensure that the flexibility is maintained for us to do our job, but follow a process. I mean, that's my end goal here.
May I?
Yeah.
Comment on that too? One of the things I think is important to recognize is that the employees in the muni have been given a directive, I mean, this is from 2001, by the mayor in terms of how they can communicate with us. And so I think it's also important for us to recognize that we can put people in a conflict, by asking them to do certain things when they've been told not to. However, I think that because the scope of this policy at least is intended to be more general, it would not rule out like a whistleblower situation or anything like that where the proper channels don't work. At least I believe that part of the intention is for us to recognize the situation we may inadvertently put staff members in by making requests, and also the fact that they may not have all the information by virtue of their position.
Can you maybe respond directly to the attorney concern that I raised?
That would be difficult for me to respond to. Did you want to?
I wanted to talk about that.
Great.
In drafting this, I recognize the municipal attorneys are really unique. The principal executives, the municipal manager, and the chief risk officer. The municipal attorney is unique because in charter, the municipal attorney represents the whole piece of government, including the assembly and the administration. So I struggled a little bit with the exact question you're asking, but I included in principal executives in this draft. Perhaps there's a different way to treat the municipal attorney's office. Maybe we'll get some feedback on that. But so that's not the best example because there are a lot of matters where the municipal attorney works for you on some project you have a co-drafting or so forth. And if I could, one other example I wanted to use, and why this policy seems good. When I first started in this role, I asked, I think it was someone in the planning department to do something, put something together for me. But that's using their time, and they have a manager who manages their time and their resources. And if I just sort of undercut the planning director and try to use planner's time to do something for me that takes hours and so forth, that's really, I think, inappropriate for me to do. I mean, I didn't realize it at first, but I got some communication from the chief of staff, not Mrs. Bronx, it was a different person then, and I recognized that asking subordinate staff to use a significant amount of time to do a project for me is something that their manager should know about.
And just to be clear, I always do that. So if I have Chris or Anna or Becky or me, but the attorney thing feels a little different to me, and it sort of goes against the theory of, oh, those are our lawyers too. They're really not if we have to get permission to talk with them. I would remove the municipal attorney from the list of people that this applies to. But I guess your response might be, well, we should still come to you and ask if Quincy can work on something.
If I might speak to it, I mean, I was sort of sitting there and kind of turning around in my head because on the one mind, in theory, the municipal attorney does represent the assembly, so ethically speaking, my obligation is to represent you as my clients, and so the same obligation transfers to everyone in the department, but you can also see that challenge what if the municipal attorney is not responsive or something, and you want to go directly to attorneys. I do appreciate
or
the
politically unaligned.
Yeah, I mean, I have the same kind of questions because I do prefer to be CC'd, and we also do prefer to move work around within the department. You might say, oh, I've worked with Quincy in the past, so I'm just going to CC her and tell her, or email her directly and tell her I need her to do this massive project. And you might not realize that she has a briefing deadline next week, and so I really need you to work with Ryan instead of like you're going to kill Quincy and she will leave us. So all that to say, I have a lot of thoughts that aren't necessarily clearly formulated at this point, but I agree that potentially different treatment for the municipal attorney's office is called for because unlike all of the other departments who do not report to the assembly, report up to the executive, the municipal attorney is somewhat different in that we do represent both, well, our report up to the mayor, we do separately have a attorney-client relationship with this body and reports separately to you. So I could see there being a separate categorization of for the municipal attorney's office, distinct from the rest of the administration.
Yeah, so I have Cameron, Ona, Chris, and then I'm adding more people to the queue.
So,
Sure.
just two points. One is that, that this, with the exception of the attorney, which I want to speak to real after, this seems pretty straightforward to me. I appreciate it because I think that it also gives me guidance as to who to contact. I originally was, just contacting one person and having that person help me to then navigate through. And so I appreciate having a set of procedures and a process for how the administration or how any administration would prefer that I gather in information or assign tasks. And it doesn't strike me as limiting at all. I think that I don't know what the repercussions of not following it would be. So it seems to me that if I want to know the process and the policy, then I do it. And if I want to break the policy and the process, then I do it. And I realize that I'm breaking it. So that's great. So I know that I'm going to go to this person, and if I can't get what I need out of that person, then I might break the rule and go to someone else and just realize I'm doing that. But at least I know I'm doing it. So this overall doesn't bother me. I think it's great, and I actually think we need this kind of thing. I appreciate the conversation about the municipal attorney because I think it's different, and I think that makes a lot of sense, and it may be beneficial to have somebody in there that really articulates that, so that that relationship is clearly handled differently. Anything to share?
Thank you. Ona, did you want to add more?
I was just going to clarify through the chair from the administration's perspective on the questions that Mr. Constant and Ms. Davidson raised, along with what Mr. Gates and what Ms. LaFrance responded with. I'm going to use the state as the example here. The legislature and the governor, different branches of government, in regards to the municipal attorney argument, they both have their own legal departments. The legislature has legislative affairs agency and the legal help that lives there, and the governor has the Department of Law and the AG and everything that goes along with that. So the municipal attorney question is the confusing one, but because of the way the municipality is structured, sharing the resources within the municipal attorney's office under ethics laws and legal rules about how you can't, cross-contaminate when Austin is working on something. Becky can't come and tell the administration that Austin is working on that unless she has Austin's permission. And I think so far that has worked throughout time as the administrations and assemblies have changed. In regards to Mr. Constant's point about the potential for misalignment in political ideology or potentially personality problems or whatever the circumstances are, that is the existence of the two branches of government. That tension is supposed to exist, but we are not supposed to involve our employees in that tension. It is supposed to be between us and not between the people who do the work of the municipality. So if you are accessing through the designated senior managers that are on this list and not getting a response or not getting the response you want, you have the power to do whatever you like to make it public that stonewalling is happening. That's your recourse. We should not be involving the employees of the municipality in that conversation because of what Mr. Gates said, that going in and saying, hey, Planner X, can you please do this, that, and the other, because the managers above them do have workflow in mind and do have actual day-to-day tasks that need to be taken care of. I think our experience so far, at least from my perspective, has been we are not interested in stonewalling any of your processes, whether we agree with them or not. We will try and push them in a direction that we think is more beneficial for either the people who are doing the work or the community at large. But we will facilitate the connection to the people that have to have those conversations. We believe that every time one of those conversations happens, unless otherwise approved, that one of the senior managers needs to be in the room so that we understand exactly what the assembly is asking for. We know what the work process is.
we know how much time it's gonna take, and we can be supportive of that process or give you a recommendation as to a different way to do that. That's how our administration functions. I cannot guarantee behavior for administrations into the future, but the existence of the two branches of government is supposed to have this opportunity to butt up against each other, but it's our opportunity, not the opportunities for the people who are employed.
All right, thank you. So if folks can just give sort of their final comments or anything else as I go down the queue, we have to move on. So Chris.
Yeah, I think that you're right. There is a separation of the branches of government, and the staff shouldn't be improperly impressed upon by us to respond, but also shouldn't be improperly impressed upon by the administration not to respond. In the legislature, as an example, they provide themselves with a deliberative process, kind of immunity. They can have conversations with members of the executive branch informally. They do frequently. They get input and they develop their policy proposals. Not coming to the committee, come sit before my committee. They don't invite subordinates to the committee chair, but they have conversations all the time. And I think Mr. Perez-Verde over here hit the nail on the head. Ultimately, what's the hammer? If I in fact do continue my relationships with the people who call me and tell me all the things they have going on and what's working and what's not working. And what this will do is just drive those conversations deeper into a personal privilege that I will hold. And I guess following on Mr. Gates's theory, they can subpoena me to figure out who my contacts are. And, we'll have that conversation. But this isn't anything to do with this administration. This is just, we have an extraordinarily strong mayor form of government, and I don't feel like we are in a position to grant the administration any more power than it already has consolidated under the charter and the code.
Thank you. Suzanne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I see this as a starting point, and then any kind of escalation from here is not necessarily breaking policy. And so, like, if someone were to go to a subpoena or make huge stink at a Tuesday meeting or post on Facebook or whatever we do to, get what we need, I mean, that seems like the natural progression from here. And I don't see that as saying we won't do those things, or at least that's the intention, I think.
Thank you. Fred.
Thank you, Mr. Perez is right. These are general policy things, quite common. And you can imagine from both sides. The organizations don't want to have their internal people betraying them and so on and so forth. Just common sense and courtesy will make this work. We need to be very clear when we go to somebody and ask a question. I almost always say, I don't need a lot of research. Just give me a quick answer. And lots of time that'll take less time than them going to get permission to talk to me, and so on and so forth. I see this administration has all been good faith. If not, I'm easily fooled when they've done it. I've worked in environments where that doesn't happen. And Chris, I can be really sneaky about developing all my own intelligence sources, and working around that stuff. And I'm going to do it if I have to do my job. But I think that we ought to start with people are trustworthy, be very careful of their time, and clear with our print, and never imply if we aren't getting what we want, we'll see you at budget time. And I know you're PCN, that kind of stuff. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Dee.
Yeah, I just wanted to note, since we opened it up and said, hey, you're all welcome to come to the municipal attorney's office, we've had a flood of things come. My concern is I think we need to put together a little procedure apart from this, because people are asking us things in elevators, on phone calls at night, and if they're one response email, no problem. But when it involves a little bit more than that, and I think the procedure will probably, I would suggest it's going to come from me, because I know, first of all, you may be asking entirely the wrong attorney or a young attorney who doesn't know this. So that I think there will be some type of, comes to us. We've already informed our attorneys that they need to let us know about any significant assembly projects, and it's assumed that they are all confidential unless we're told otherwise. So I think that will be a separate process to just rein it in a little bit. The department heads can't just, well, they can ask us questions and we give their email response, but they can't do major projects without a request for legal services. And it keeps things docketed, it keeps proper supervision over attorneys and also time management. So at some point, we'll work that out with you as well. And again, we welcome, we've had lots of interesting stuff going on right now.
Thank you. Yeah, what question do you have?
Dee, when we make these requests, we have that number up here, 400 or something legal, civil, legal, whatever. Are the ones we've been making included in that number?
Generally not,
Right.
unless the attorney has said I want to formally open a matter, because we have a huge database. And so if it's going to be something like working with a CLUTNA, we might say, oh, let's open a time matters, because then we save that forever. And we have those conversations for the next time that same issue comes in.
Doesn't that then argue for a similar form if we have a legislative project we want to work on that we could then say,
Exactly.
here you go, it gets it a number, it gets it in the file, it gets it in the queue.
Get supervision. I mean,
Right.
it doesn't just die in someone's pile.
Thank you. John?
I think if we write this up, one thing we should make clear is that nothing here would preclude any municipal employee contacting us as we would as their representative on the assembly in any regard. Because I've got people who happen to work for the city, have all kinds of issues and call.
Thank you. Austin?
Thanks, Felix. I guess, is Ona's gone? I think Ona made some really good points, and I totally agree with her. I just want to highlight that the difference with us is we work nearly full-time, we have no staff, and we have one attorney that we share. And so we are very different from the legislature. A House rep represents a third of the constituents and has 2+ staff members and has multiple attorneys at his or her beck and call. So I think I just want to remind the body that that's a problem, and I think we should continue to try to improve our department so that we actually can be a check on the on the executive branch, which I think right now is problematic. So anyway,
Thank you.
Oh, one more question. How is this something you just sign as chair, or is it something we're voting on, or what's the process
So
for it?
there's two ways to do this. There is I just sign it as chair, but that's not how I wanted to do this one. I wanted to do this one as the assembly adopts it. By resolution.
If we could add some language that speaks to the fact that this is a guide and not a black line document, then that would resolve much of my concern. That would resolve much of my concern. This is how we propose it should work. We recognize that sometimes it doesn't work that way.
Sure. Chris Schutte, and then I'll go to
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have focused your conversation on ideological matters. I just wanted to remind folks that there's also a very real logistical need for direct communication with your executive team. We have all of you have at one point been involved in a long email thread of one kind or another with the constituent, where somebody has perhaps directly contacted the staff person while another assembly member has contacted an executive manager. There's a lot of wheels that spin at that point, and as far as delivering service to our constituents that we represent, sometimes we screw things up when that happens. So there's a real logistical need for having a sort of a hierarchy of approach, which we appreciate, and I can honestly say that all of you follow pretty closely, so I appreciate that. And then the last comment, Mr. Chairman, is just my own feedback on the draft policy. In the scope section, section 2, it is the second to last sentence that enumerates the exceptions to this rule. It says this does not apply to discussion of general concepts, inquiries into staff regular position duties and role. That one troubles me slightly, and I don't have copies of the CBAs next to me in order to compare that, but I do think that that one, be cautious with that one, because as Mr. Dyson described earlier, you don't want it to seem as if the assembly is trying to meddle in actual employment actions with employees by asking questions like that, or by in any way intimating that they are interested in that position for a particular reason. So I don't know if there's a better way to phrase it, or if you just strike it, but that's jumped out to me, and I think you should perhaps pay attention to that particular line. Thank you.
Thank you. Meg, then Cameron.
Thank you. I just have a question, so to be looked at for if we go to work session on this, what would be the remedy if we have conflicting policies, one from the administration about communication and our own guidance? And it's nothing we have to talk about or answer right now, but I think it's something to be considered for that work session. Because right now, these two conflict considerably if they were both to be in process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, and I'm not sure this is a part of this, but I think it's directly related. As I'm still feeling very new in my role in the Assembly, I am struggling with the idea that when I'm communicating with a constituent about an issue, and I want to gather information for that constituent about their issue, where and how to engage with the administration, and then when to hand it off, when to hold it. So they email me, I say, good question. Do I not involve that constituent and independently contact the administration, gather that information, and then independently get it back? So I am literally no one communicates with no one. Or am I connecting the two and go, you know what, you just need to talk to this person, right? So that's my challenge, is that, and what I don't want to do is put the administration on the spot by copying them on my email with the constituent, and then they're not just communicating with me, they're communicating with the constituent with me in the room or in the email. So I don't know if that fits in here, because this is about gathering information, getting information, but how that communication loop runs, and maybe it's personal preference, people are going to do it their own way, that's great, I don't want to infringe on that. But I would like at some point to have a conversation, some guidance, some thoughts from legal, from others about what you would recommend in those cases, both from a staffing perspective in terms of you now responding not only to me but to the constituent, and just the quantity of emails now that are going on. So I'm interested in that. I'm not sure where it fits, but I want to throw it out. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. And I think, yeah, sure.
I know you're running out of time, Mr. Chairman. I'll chime in. I think I've had this conversation with probably half of you, if not all of you, but that's a really good question, and it is up to assembly person discretion entirely.
Sure.
The general rule of thumb is if it's a constituent inquiry that ultimately is going to require that constituent to interact with the municipal employee or process, just make the connection and let them go apply for their new business license or whatever it is they've asked you about. If it's something more substantial, how did this come to be? Typically, those come to the executive manager for the actual research and review, and that information is delivered back to each of you for you to do with as you please. And I think that generally speaking, that process works pretty well. So just by rule of thumb, that's what I've always recommended, and I think that's probably a good path forward. Thanks.
Training task force topic, okay? And don't forget the back of your business cards.
Wait, what?
How about making this a training task force topic?
Oh, okay.
Great.
What's the
Thank you.
business card then?
So it has all the contracts in the back.
Yeah. All right. So with the remaining time we have, apologies, I didn't expect that to take as much time as it did. I want to switch to doing roundtable and then audience participation, and then we probably need to move on to the on-site work session. So let's go ahead and start with roundtable, starting with you, Fred. And sorry if you don't know what I'm saying. So this is part of the Rules Committee meeting where we go roundtable and we talk about things that we're working on or want to collaborate with other members on.
Yeah, so I've started a little bit on the Title 21 modification that might allow the Hope Center to have a variance on the zoning. So just started on that. Also, we did a climate response resolution thing here, a climate plan. Nothing was in there about the smoke problem we've gotten from these fires over months. One pulmonary physician said half her patients were in the hospital over a long period of time. So I'm working on something on that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. John?
I imagine there may be 11 of us thinking, gosh, we need to do something to Title 21 and transit centers. So I'd recommend that
Did you mean transit center, or did you mean Hope
Homeless,
Center?
homeless.
Okay.
Well, not just Hope, I think. Where do you allow transient centers? And that would apply potentially to Hope.
Emergency shelters, if you will.
And that too. They're
That's
different.
the term now, emergency
Well,
shelter.
no, but they're different. Emergency shelter is not a transient center.
I don't know what a transient center is.
What do we call, Brother Francis, what's their official designation?
Temporary?
No, that's.
Now it's the
No, it's
emergency.
allowed, it's, there, I think Title 21 has a
Through the
category.
chair,
Yeah.
we're confusing terms in Title 21. Transients can mean hostel or short-term stay, but I understand the intent of what you're talking about.
With Brother Francis, conditional use for shelter.
They're permanent.
Oh, well, maybe that's what I mean then. See, it's confusing, we need to tighten it up, make it work. So I just recommend we put it through that committee and everybody, instead of having 11 people, contact D and D.
Can you be more specific, put what through the committee?
Well, I'm confusing it as I get it. A clear issue came up when we discussed Hope Center status, because what they're doing apparently isn't allowed according to Title 21. And I'd like to see work done to research that and recommend a remedy done through the Green Economic Development Committee. Does that help? I know what I mean.
So you're talking about strictly definitions and what's allowed and what's not allowed?
It's gonna be more complex.
Well, so it'll be very
It'll be
complicated.
more
elucidated.
Yeah.
Still
Okay.
figuring it out.
Go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, just quickly, Susanna and I had our health policy committee meeting on Wednesday. Just Felix is there, just so the rest of you know. We heard from animal control on the update to the Title 17 changes. We had a working group, Mr. Constant. I can't remember if did you come to the meetings?
Not the
Okay.
Title 17 yet.
But we had a working group and we addressed both the problem with the bond. It's now going to be paid after 30 days. And also the shelters, we took out the part that described what inadequate shelters are and just added a little bit in what a shelter can be to make the possibility of having inconsistencies there lessened. So I think we're in good shape. We asked them to put together a memo describing exactly what the changes are so that people could read that memo while they're looking at the updated ordinance. So that should be coming for September 10th. Chris and I are working on a responsible contracting ordinance to make sure that the vendors or the contractors we're working with don't have wage and hour and other issues, and Dee and Quincy have been working on that. John and Meg and I met about the vacancy ordinance when there's a vacancy on the assembly, and we talked about ranked choice and how we could maybe incorporate that, and I've asked Dean to draft a concept that we came up with, and hoping that he's able to do that by Wednesday, and hopefully even before, so the three of us can look at it when we have the elections meeting.
It's on the agenda.
Yes, that's why I'm hoping he can draft it. And then ongoing work on Title II, we meet almost weekly. We have a bunch of stuff we've been working in. Cameron and I have talked to Aaron Leggett about incorporating a land acknowledgement and even have language for that, and we've been working on other aspects of it too.
Thanks. Pete?
Thank you. The GIS department is doing some mapping of trails, and it's turning out to be rather extensive. And from the meeting that we had 3 weeks ago, it may take a little longer than we had originally anticipated, but the final project is probably going to be pretty amazing. And actually, if you look at the Muni website, all the maps that are already on there that the GIS has put together, it's already very extensive. And so this will just be an additional one to add to that.
Great. Thanks. Forrest?
Yeah, Austin and I are working on a parking ordinance, but I met with ACDA about it, and that might be coming forward. The timeline's a little, it depends on ACDA to a certain degree. Chris and I just started a project, but I don't know if it's really worth talking about yet. If you want to talk about it, we can. Other than that, I just want to remind everybody that we're going to have a discussion in September, I'm almost positive we put out to September, about expanding the number, about asking the people of Anchorage if we want to expand the number of assembly members to 12. So we had set that out pretty far, and so just bring that back to the front of your mind and think about what that would look like.
Yeah, that comes back before us on September 24th. So, thanks. Thanks. Go ahead, Meg.
So the communications pillar, Chris and I were tasked with that, and Barbara has joined our work group. We have 7 ideas, and I'll figure out a way that we can appropriately disseminate those 7 ideas for additional feedback. And if anybody else wants to join us, we're looking for one more member. And with regard to shelters and Title 21, Chris, Cameron, and myself have been working on something with regard to shelter licensing and Title 21 implications and substantive standards as well as locations. We could bring that into the CEDC or something, but we've been working on that for quite a while. That would be comprehensive and would ultimately be a potential address for the Oak Downtown Center. So,
what's your schedule? Where, I mean, do you want to bring it to that committee? And
we can.
all on the committee.
We have a mechanics portion of it kind of worked out, ready for some discussion, and we're working on the substance of what would apply if you were a licensed shelter, because it is the one care entity we have with no substantive standards.
Because I think we have room on the end of September meeting, the last meeting of September.
That would be good timing.
Felix, do you want me to move to extend the meeting by 10 minutes?
Yeah, let's do it.
Second.
Thank you.
I can pull it together and put it on the agenda, and then we can work on that.
So it's the Thursday before our second meeting in December.
Okay.
September.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Chris.
Yeah, number of things. The charter amendment discussion is super important, top of mind for me. Any discussion about creating an opportunity for a shelter to operate in a B2 district should be B2 wide, not just one lot, so that that does not just become a function of one neighborhood. But the aspirational project that I'm really excited about, that I will mention, just because we're starting to work on it, Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Perez-Verde, and myself are engaging in a conversation with the native village of Akutna to encode some recognition of their status as a sovereign government that exists within the municipality. So in some ways it would be taking that land acknowledgement and putting it in the code, and at the same time coming up with some procedures for relationship and that conversation. We look to draft a resolution that announces the process that we anticipate to run for a year of conversation between the communities, and that would likely kick off in October and conclude at AFN next year in Anchorage. So we've had early conversations with the tribal chief, and there's a warm reception to this conversation. And we will have a number of meetings that will be held in public, open, so that all the members can come. But we do have 3 members working on that project at this time.
And that's with the village, not just corporate.
Yeah, the village.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, it's definitely the village. The corporation will be invited as a voice, but not
Oh, that's
the
great.
center.
Very cool.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Suzanne.
Thanks, Felix. Great job to Austin on the working group for the Title 17. That was a really effective way, I think, to deal with the animal code stuff. So that was really helpful. And then also on the Health Policy Committee front, Austin, Felix, and I are looking into acting on a recommendation from the Substance Abuse Misuse report that would involve changing substance abuse in code to substance misuse. So that's in the early stages. Felix and I are working on revisions to pawn shop ordinance. And then on the topic of the stormwater utility, John and I have had a lot of meetings this last week, and we'll be looking to bring something forward at least by the September 10 meeting. I don't know if we'll have that special utility committee meeting, enterprise utility committee or not. So.
Can I add a footnote?
Sure.
Under the substance misuse rubric for the committee, if you haven't heard, the person who's from the state has left that position. And so the gentleman who's come and reported to us consistently over the last 2 years, and so for a year and a half, just FYI, he's no longer there. So we'll be looking for a new contact.
Thanks.
Thanks. Cameron.
More than anything, I have a couple of quick questions. I think most of you were met with the Anchorage Home Builders Association, and they have a number of sort of interests and projects moving forward. And I told them that I would bring this up in the Rules Committee. That what I don't know at this point is if anybody has already begun working on any of those. And so I guess that's a question. There were 3 major issues. Is there work being done on any of those at this point within the body?
Sorry, can you say that again?
The Anchorage Home Builders Association met with a number of people individually and brought up there were 3 primary sort of projects they wanted to be working on, and I explained the rules committee and how it works but what I don't know if there's already been a formation around any of those within the body.
John and I talked about one issue, one time, and then that was it.
From ours, we asked them to get more information and follow back up.
I'm working on one that was from them, but on the side, and this is with Dean, and that's trying to figure out if there is an allowance for a tax rebate or tax deduction, tax abatement of some kind for energy efficiency. And so this is a very creative project because our tax abatements have to be authorized by state law. And so we're trying to be creative, which is one of their priorities, but I don't know if it's one of the 3 you're talking about.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just tag on to that a little bit. Yes, my understanding is they have the language that they want to use, and they'll bring that forward when they have it together. So we just haven't heard anything from them. But I think to add to that too would be the wastewater issue.
And the only one is I've gotten 5 emails over the last few weeks just inquiring about the alcohol tax or any other sort of work on taxing, and just an inquiry is if there's any work groups or anybody working on that at this point. Is there?
Yeah, I think there's several of us working on proposals.
Individually, but there's not a formation.
Separate from us, if I might, there's a group outside of the municipality, municipal government, that's working on an initiative that they're going to bring forward that we would have to authorize if we supported it. And so I would speak offline because they haven't made it public, but I'll fill you in.
I just want to connect these people to whatever that's going on. Okay. All right, but there's nothing forming within the body of that. Okay. Thanks. That's it.
Thanks. Crystal.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just tag on to Cameron's comment about Anchorage Home Builders. They do have several things, and I think not stormwater, but the not wastewater, but stormwater drainage issues. They're going to have even some more things to bring forward and start kind of gelling. But I don't know that I'm specifically working on anything particular. I just have a couple of thoughts. But I am hiring an aide that I should have on board here in about 2 weeks. I'm pretty excited about that. But I know we got kind of maybe a little tired of all the animal control change issues, and I might be bringing up another one, so I'll just warn you about that one. And that's in regard to barking. So anyway.
You don't even know the territory.
You're opening Pandora's box.
Yeah,
I have a suggestion. Add cat licensing. It'll be perfect. It'll be perfect.
Anyway,
You should work on Title 21 while you're at
it.
it.
Something just kind of erupted recently, and it's like, okay, that's enough. But anyway, I do think that we'll probably be talking more about some closure procedures for marijuana shops that might be going out of business. We don't really have anything yet. So it was one of the things when I was on the Anchorage School Board. I said, we need to talk about how you close a school, if you're going to consolidate or whatever. And I said, let's do that before it's actually happening, and then you have to scramble to do it. And I think it's the same thing we ought to be doing with the marijuana industry, is that, have everything in place before it becomes an emotional issue or a personal issue. We may get started, or I may get started on something.
Can I
like
move to
that.
extend by 5 minutes?
Sure. Okay, thanks.
Second.
Thanks. Did you want to speak on that, John?
No, are you done? I just want to add a couple
Well,
of
you
points.
can, if you want to. I mean, I've got a couple other things.
No,
but-
go ahead.
Okay, well, the other thing was just in regard to having had the audit reports in terms of some of these commissions and boards. I think there's still some things that could be probably finessed with how we deal with the process of membership. It's kind of arduous. It's very time consuming for some people. It takes 6 months, and we probably ought to be able to do something that maybe helps, especially with some of those boards like ours out in Cheyenne Eagle River that just doesn't meet except for very sporadically. So anyway, I kind of want to look at that. And
There's some stuff going on that.
okay, good. Well, then I can talk with you about that too. And then the other thing is, I kind of brought up the question before about how we really can help our community councils over this insurance issue. And so I want to dig into that a little bit and see how we fix that. That's kind of, to me, it's one of the silly things that shouldn't be
Anyway, other than that, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You just reminded us, like, oh, yeah,
Okay.
we didn't think about that issue.
Your turn,
Good.
January.
Because, we don't have enough on our plate already.
That's
Thanks.
fine.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to add that I'm working with Barbara and others on quasi-judicial procedures for the assembly. That's come out pretty far along, actually. And then regarding the home builders, one thing we've had ongoing discussions with them, but we have a new building official. Some of their issues are how things run there. He's brand new. I mean, he's really going through his first season here. So I've kind of told him, well, let's wait. Let's see what he comes up with. And then some of these discussions we'll have after he's got a season behind him. So that knocks it off to September, October. But we do have requests. There's this Bend and Adams report that the home builders refer to often. It's a good report. The city had it done. But they're to give us quarterly updates on progress on any of those issues. And they gave us one, I think 3 months ago, so we're probably due again pretty soon.
Yeah, scheduled for.
Yeah, so we had one of our next two, we'll do that same one on the 24th, but something coming up.
Okay, thank you. So, there are several agenda topics that I was hoping we'd get to today, but we just won't have time to. So, I'm going to go ahead and move on to audience participation. Eugene, did you want to?
Could you just mention what we should do with this?
Yeah, sure. So, this is just a read, digest, and then this is that work product that I had told you guys would be coming forward based on the goals and then discussions with the committee chairs. This has been discussed with the administration and had actually really positive conversations with the administration about adopting most of these, and then of course revenue measures to adopt some of the more expensive ones. So those will be conversations we have soon. So if you have any questions about it, feel free to send it to me. All right, go ahead, Eugene.
Yeah, I'll be on topic here. You can prohibit a public process, not too valid, I reckon. With regard to mostly sensitive meetings today, you addressed policies and procedures and looking at your line of communication, appropriate line of communication, dealing with you and administration. And you brought up material of past history of what that line of authority is and so forth. Thank you. I do not question the Assembly's right to adopt policy and procedures. It's how you do it. Now, today is the first time I've heard about this scenario, and very few people in the public are aware of this dialogue that's happening. They're not here. But the fact is, you have a standard out there in the Assembly. When you go from here to the Assembly meeting, you put it on the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, and it's adopted or not adopted. There's no chance for the public to hear it or review it. I would strongly encourage you, although it's not required by code or law, that these resolutions that you adopt on policy procedures, and look at this as an item that concerns your appropriate line of communication of concerns and information between you and administration, that you, when you do put it on the agenda, you put it at a public hearing item, and you do an introduction, and you give time for the public to see that out there so they can be party. Now, in just a reference, a little note on that, I've heard in past discussions by Assembly members, well, that public has a chance to address it because they could send us by emails and so forth. Well, the idea of a public meeting is the public to reach you. And there's no way in that setup to basically have the public to reach out and communicate to you on that item. And then one last footnote, that's all, is to an update to what I just said earlier, is on the emergency out there in the valley, the fire. I encourage you, for wanting more information, to go akfireinfo.com. Don't go to you're not going to find it on the borough website, but that is basically where you're going. And tonight there'll be a 6:30 meeting, most likely be streamed by KTU, and remind you that some members of the Assembly currently and former Assembly members own property out there, along with many residents of Anchorage that are in high-risk areas right now. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close this committee.